Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Focus Forum. I'm Rita Riker, Chairman of the Board of Focus Greater Syracuse, and happy to welcome you all here, both in person and online, in the cloud somewhere. Today's topic is water conservation, and we're thrilled to have local experts who will explore water conservation, watershed health, and the shared environmental responsibility of protecting Central New York's most essential natural resource. I'm going to briefly introduce each of our panelists, and then I'm going to turn it over to them to help us learn a little bit more. Mark Berger is Executive Director of the Onondaga County Soil and Water Conservation District and Program Manager for the Onondaga Lake Watershed Agricultural Program. Mark oversees a staff of 12 full-time and 9 part-time employees. Among many other things, he is a certified professional in erosion and sediment control and a New York State DEC cooperating consultant course. Stephanie Johnson is project manager of the Onondaga County Onondaga Environmental Institute. Stephanie holds a PhD in ecology from SUNY ESF. She works closely with the Institute's education and outreach educator to implement science-based experiential learning and engagement for youth and adults alike to better connect people to nature, instill a sense of place, and empower communities to be active stewards of their local environment. Sounds a lot like what Focus is trying to do. Maddie Nyblade, I hope I'm pronouncing that last name correctly, is assistant professor in the Environmental Studies Department at SUNY ESF. She is also the faculty co-director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment. She works with Indigenous nations and community partners to study and care for our waters here in Central New York and across the Great Lakes. We are proud to say that Maddie is also a distinguished graduate of the winter 2024 cohort of Focus's Citizen Academy. By the way, applications are now open. Welcome, Matt. Welcome all.
I had the honor of being a distinguished. It's only just a graduate.
It says
That's what I wrote.
Mark, you're up first.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here. I did bring some handouts, and they're on the table over here to the left. I want to start out with a question. What is it we all have in common?
Need for water.
A need for water, absolutely. And that water, when we're in the county, comes from Watershed Lake, and in the city comes from Onondaga Lake watershed. But we also all need to eat, and there's a relationship there between our people who are feeding us and all of us consuming that food and the water. So with that, we're all in this together. So our organization has 12 staff members. We do a lot with agriculture and a lot with the other environmental sectors. So we do a lot with aquatic and terrestrial invasive species management, forest management, and right now a lot of our forestry-based teams are out doing mineral dashboard and hemlock woolly algae treatments. We do critical area revegetation for municipalities. So if they've got a municipal project that benefits the public or road ditch cleanouts that need to get revegetated right away, we have a crew dedicated 6 months out of the year for that. We have a person who does nothing but stormwater management for the county and the local municipalities each and every day. And our work with our farmers, who's 1% of our population, but yet again feed us 3 times a day. About 50% of our workload is in agriculture. And statewide, our amazing farms here in the county put us 3rd in poultry and egg production. We're 6th in livestock and poultry and other related products. 9th in milk from cow production, 11th in cultivated Christmas trees and the short rotation woody crops that were founded by ESF, 12th in grains, dry beans, and dry peas, 13 in fruit, nuts, and berries. And so that's Onondaga County's rating across the entire New York State region. We put up $178 million in market value of products sold. So out of 62 counties, we're number 10 statewide in terms of how much agricultural product comes out of our county. Nationally, and these are some statistics that also really excite me, top 4% of the total pounds of milk produced in all dairy producing counties in the United States. It's really amazing. We have good soils, good climate and good farmers here. And one of the neatest things is we're in the top 10% of the best places to farm in the United States. So that's a real, really something to be proud of, in my opinion. And am proud of the work we've done with our farmers over the last 82 years through the Soil and Water Conservation District. Our goal is to help them keep the soil on the land, the nutrients in the soil, and the water clean. And to do that, we use BMPs, or best management practices. So we'll do cover crops. When they harvest their corn or their soybeans, they'll come back through with an annual crop, get that planted. So when you see green, lush green out on the field that used to be corn or soybeans, that's cover crops. Our farmers are putting in around 10,000 acres of cover crops a year. It's amazing. Manure nutrient management and incorporation with their application. It's some of the manure is nature's greatest recycling. We're using that manure. It's organic to produce next year's crops. We do a lot with buffers. We do a lot with pasture systems. We do a lot with urban agriculture. And many don't know, but right here at the Brady Farm, it's one of the largest contiguous urban farms in the nation. And we have it right here in Syracuse. So really another amazing statistic. Our farms were some of the first in the state to use robotics to milk cows and feed cows. And we're also, we've got probably 25% of our farms using precision agriculture, GPS guided equipment to put down like the lime, the fertilizers and stuff like that, if they're needed and where they're needed. It's not just all across the field, it's strategic and specific. And then one of the other really neat things is we live in this area because we love the beautiful views and the vistas and the open space that's provided, helping to work with our conservation partners to put permanent protective easements on that land, keep those lands open and accessible and enjoyable for all of our community. Our farms have had a lifelong commitment to their communities, to preserving their land for the next generation, and they love to tell their story, and they will help their neighboring farms, and we are mentors to farms abroad. So that's something that's been really exciting, and that happens year after year. And in order to make all this work happen, I have a staff of 12 full-time people. And so I have some farm planners, I have some farm implementers. The planners go out and meet with the farmers and they conceptualize, what are you doing for stewardship? What else do you want to accomplish for stewardship? Then our implementation team takes that information and puts together designs, cost estimates. We pursue grants. We live and die by the grants. Sometimes we have as many as 30 grant applications going out the door a year. And we use that funding to help offset the cost of putting these conservation improvements on the farms, those being on the farm. We also receive support from the Onondaga County Agricultural Council. You often see it as On Farm Fest, third Saturday of every year. I think it's September 19th this year. But also behind the scenes is the Agricultural Council of the county helping to get these projects on the ground. I'm blessed to have essentially two boards. I have a district soil and water board, and they review our projects and release the funding for those projects. But also in the Skinny Atlas Lake watershed, we have a specific watershed committee and have for 32 years to help review the technical feasibility of all the projects that are proposed to go out on the land. It's not uncommon for us to pull in between $1 million and $4 million a year in grant funding. And one of the coolest things is so much of that money stays local. That money goes back into supporting over 220 businesses right here in our area community. One of the components I'm really proud of is we're the only county in the state of New York that had a coordinated agricultural spill response program. Agriculture is like the airline industry. We make things with human hands, we have human decisions, but occasionally something goes wrong. We don't want it to go wrong, but we're prepared when it does go wrong. So if there's a spill of fertilizer, milk, or manure, you've got a coordinated 24/7, 365 response program out of our office. It's coordinated with the 911 center, the DEC. We bring in other resources like volunteer fire departments, etc., to help clean up and contain any of those spills, keep them out of the water, and ultimately help protect water quality. And sometimes I'll hear people say, geez, you know, those farmers live in the hinterlands, they can do whatever they want, and that's not really true. There's over 21 different groups. We've actually sat and counted this out a couple of years ago. There's over 21 different groups. When the farmer gets up, put their boots on, and go out the door to go to work, 21 different groups here in central New York have some say in how that farm operates. So the bottom line is our farms are very heavily regulated. And our farmers are some of the smartest people I know. I know of no other profession that requires you to be over 26 types of business professional all wrapped into one. One of the latest things, robotics technician. Wow. That certainly is not me, but it's definitely them. Fabricators, investors, entomologists, botanists, and the list will go on. So pretty incredible what it takes to be a farmer in today's day and age. The other thing we need to remember is behind those farms, and I always hear factory farms, but behind those farms are sons and daughters, and aunts and uncles and cousins and moms and dads and grandpas and grandmas. You can trace the history of these farms right back to those original roots. And a lot of these farms are civil servants in the community. They're volunteer firefighters and EMTs. They're local leaders in the community. They're also on various boards of organizations to help promote those businesses successfully. And I can stand here, sit here, and tell you all the great things that our farms do. But when the real testament is when we take and nominate farms at the state level or the national level for awards, and that review committee comes back and says, geez, so we really agree with you. That's the real proof in the pudding. And we've got 3 farms that have won the Aldo New York State Aldo Leopold Conservation Stewardship Award. And we've also had 3 farms that have won the National Dairy Sustainability Award. And I think our region has some of the greatest number of winners of the national award. So something to really be proud of. And with that, I would like to close with just a few thoughts. And these are quotes from our farmers. We as farmers know that we've got to take care of this land or we're not going to be in business. And we want that top 6 inches of topsoil to stay on the land more than anyone else. While our high income countries like the United States and the UK spend about 10% of our finances on food, our lower income nations are spending upwards of 50%. And probably one of the statements that has resonated with me the most over the years is good farmers can't help it. They want to leave the ground better than they found it. So that's what we do in a quick summary at the County Soil and Water Conservation District here at Central New York.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Stephanie.
And I'm Steph Johnson. As was introduced, I work for the Onondaga Environmental Institute. My background, really, I guess when I think back on it, even from like childhood, has been water. My love and passion for water was instilled in me at a very young age. And I like to think of when we talk about community and sense of place and where we live, I always kind of bring it back to a watershed. And so I grew up in Madison County, one county over. I grew up kind of on a watershed divide where if water fell in my county, it could go to one of 3 major watersheds. It could go to the Oswego River, Lake Ontario watershed, Mohawk River, and the Susquehanna. So I always like to put myself in the sense of a watershed and that kind of greater connection and how water is a connector in that way, and that what we do in one area can impact another. And so with that, I work currently at the Onondaga Environmental Institute. We're a relatively small nonprofit here in the city that was actually born out of the whole Onondaga Lake cleanup issue that began really heavily in the 90s. And since then, our recent work has really shifted into the watershed itself. We do a lot of work in the streams to Onondaga Lake, and we also do some work outside of the county and other watersheds as well. But we're pretty heavily based here in the Onondaga Lake watershed. And so collectively, for being a small organization, The few folks that we have, our president, our education outreach coordinator, our project scientist, myself, we're all ESF alum. We all did some form of work in this watershed one way or another, but collectively we have like, over 100 years, I think, of experience working in watersheds, at least many decades anyways, which is kind of a cool thing to think about. But, in these larger discussions about the importance of water and water conservation, the thing that always kind of sticks with me, and it really didn't stick with me until I started working at OEI and doing more education. I was in such a science mindset coming out of grad school that I always just thought that the science could speak for itself. And I really didn't understand that until I started participating in a lot more community education and outreach, that how important experiential education and learning and those connections to community, how important it is to convey the science that a lot of times the science can't speak on its own, and getting that connection with community is really important, and no better place to do it than on the water. So we do a lot of youth education, and we also do some experiential outdoor education with adults as well. That's been a really rewarding aspect. And so I know as we get into the discussion and the questions come about how individuals and communities can get involved, I have some stories I guess I could share when we get into those discussions, but to me a lot of that ties back to community. And as Mark mentioned, OEI, similarly, we live and die by grants. So a lot of our work kind of ebbs and flows with the greater funding scene, both locally and state and federally. So sometimes that inherently has to steer the ways in which we do work. But being a small organization, as my boss always says, like, we aren't in the business of duplicating efforts and skill sets. So we do a lot of partnering. We've worked with Soil and Water. We are working with Soil and Water on a lot of projects. We work with Maddie and ESF on a lot of projects. And so I guess that's maybe one of my other kind of themes or takeaways as we dive into these discussions, but the importance of partnership and building those types of relationships and communities and trying to advance some of these efforts.
Right? Thank you, Steph. All right, Maddie, your turn.
Well, I'm really grateful to be invited and to be on this panel with two folks who have such rich and long-standing histories caring for the water in this region. I'm a newcomer to this region, and so it's just been such a pleasure getting to know all of the committed people through Focus Greater Syracuse, is one of the places of all the dedicated people in this community who are working to make and steward the lands and care for the people and place. And so I've had the pleasure of working with Steph, and Steph has been a great teacher to me. I'm excited to work with Mark. I feel like I've had one phone call, but we'll have more. And yeah, so I'm new. I came to this area about 2.5 years ago. I'm faculty at SUNY ESF in the Environmental Studies Department. I grew up in central Pennsylvania in the Susquehanna River Basin, and also similarly to Steph, always have loved water and caring for water, and also love people, and the intersection of both of those have kind of guided my path. I went to Penn State in geoscience, so earth science, thinking about the whole earth system and the whole 4 billion years of history and how water has been a part of that and been a major force shaping this planet. That has always been so fascinating and interesting to me in thinking this larger picture of who we are and how we're connected to this place. My work in earth sciences was such a passion, but I felt a disconnect with not connecting to community, and I really wanted to also engage my science skills, but in community and for community goals. And so that led me to work in outdoor education for a bit, a place where we see people and science coming together. And then that led me further into graduate school. I went to the University of Minnesota for my PhD in earth sciences and hydrology on a project that was collaboration with Indigenous nations in the Upper Great Lakes region. So working with several Ojibwe nations and intertribal organizations to understand the impacts of climate change on wild rice, which is a sacred plant relative in food and medicine sustenance for Ojibwe nations. So thinking about how our climate is shifting, how water is shifting with that, and how is that impacting wild rice. And so that was a huge learning experience for me, and thinking about how do we work with tribal nations, relearning, unpacking the history of the United States and the role science and universities have played in supporting colonization, and what are the ways we can actually transform these institutions, use our gifts and skills for service, for healing, for restoration. A lot of bumps and mistakes along the way as well. But that has led me to this current position at ESF with the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment. The center was started by Dr. Robin Wall-Kimmerer as the director, and now the current director is Neil Patterson Jr. And they have been building this collaborative network of environmental scientists and Indigenous nations across New York State and Haudenosaunee territories and into Long Island, the Shinnecock Nation and Uncochunk, as well, to leverage and share the gifts of science within the academy in support of Indigenous nations, also learning from and sharing and lots of learning around traditional ecological knowledge and the knowledge and sciences held within the Indigenous nations, and finding places where both of those can come together and support Indigenous nations, Indigenous students, and our shared environment. So I was really honored and still am pinching myself today that this is my work, to be part of the center and join in on this decades-long effort to build relationships with Haudenosaunee nations and other nations to leverage science to support their goals and find collaborations. So the work that I do now is very much local with Onondaga Nation, thinking about impacts to water that flows through the reservation, that flows through land that was recently returned in the headwaters of Onondaga Creek. And that's a lot of the partnerships with the Onondaga Environmental Institute, who've been working for decades within this watershed, has such a rich understanding of the many complicated hydrologic factors going on in Onondaga Creek and into the lake, and then also working out with the west with the Tonawanda Seneca Nation and some of their water concerns there as well. And yeah, so I feel like I'm always learning more about the hydrology of Central New York, bringing the experiences and knowledge I have from other places, and then also learning about the local goals and priorities and new things that are coming to this area, thinking about what are the impacts to water with Micron, with development, and how can we build this community together. The last few things I just wanted to mention that came up while my co-panelists were speaking is one of the amazing things that I have learned about this region that Mark mentioned was the soils here support such agricultural activity, and the soils are part of this why the Haudenosaunee nations are here, the strength of those soils and the richness of those soils to support food production has always been a long-standing tradition with Haudenosaunee nations. And so we see that today in different ways with our farmers as well. But just wanted to make that connection. And so caring for our soils is deeply connected with caring for our water and our people and our food. It has been since time immemorial in these places. And then water flows between political boundaries. When all these boundaries were being decided, no one was thinking about watersheds. I often wonder what it would be like if you were all organized politically in watersheds. But because watersheds span political boundaries, I think it's this call to recognize we have to work across municipalities, across counties, across states with Indigenous nations to care for our shared waters. What happens upstream impacts us downstream. What we do upstream impacts folks downstream. And so it's really this call to collaborate. And so I think just as water is everywhere and connects us, to care for water, we need to be connected and work across those boundaries. And so that's something that I'm interested in and have started 2 think about how can we organize across the Onondaga Creek watershed, and that's something that I'm very excited about in the future. So I'll end there.
That's a little bit of connection among all three of us. You don't want to try, I love it. We have had some questions presented to us, submitted to us prior to this, and Brian Hoke, who is an emeritus board member of Focus, will be coordinating the questions and answers. We also have Adam King online, able to look at if there are questions being submitted from our virtual members. So, you're not Adam, Brian, go for it.
Thanks, Rita. Thanks, panelists. Thanks to you all being here virtually. Again, I'm Brian, and delighted to be here. I'm going to exploit my role as moderator for a quick question. To celebrate my father's 80th birthday, my mother and father, my wife and I have rented a boat, a 40-foot boat on the Erie Canal to go from Macedon to Brockport and back, we hope. And our boys and their partners will show up too. Can I swim in that stretch of the Erie Canal? Should I swim in that stretch of the Erie Canal? I know it's a little off topic, but it's water, right?
Yeah, most of my knowledge of the canal is on the Mohawk River side of it, and I would assume that most of the Erie Canal in that stretch is swimmable. You could certainly go on the DEC website to get information about, one of the things with the Mohawk River side of the Erie Canal is stormwater runoff. And so I would assume that would probably there'd be some problematic issues along the way, meaning you might have bacterial inputs in some stretches of that part of the canal.
Maybe I'll wait to see if others are doing it. I'm sorry, it's selfish of me, but I appreciate it. I wanted to slip in. I got experts here. I had to take a shot. So thank you. Back to our normal service.
One thing about the Erie Canal, not a system that's continually being flushed the way a stream or a river of maybe that width would be. And so you kind of have water flowing in, and there is some movement, but not much. And so what's there kind of stays there.
And I assume that's less good than if we're not. That's fair. All right. I'm going to look and see how the others seem to be doing, if there's anybody swimming. So we had questions submitted in advance. As Rita mentioned, we have Adam, who's doing online moderation. So we'll take some questions from you here and from folks out there. But a few of the questions that we got in advance, as always, I'm proud to say, the folks who participate in, are members of, come to these focus events, always are interested in what we can do, what an average citizen can do through a not-for-profit, just on their day-to-day sort of quotidian life. What would you say are our roles from the, make sure the faucet's not leaking to getting involved in political involvement? I'm curious what anybody, take all three of you if you'd like to comment, but would appreciate your insights on that.
I think from our perspective, I think everybody thinking about their role and contribution. And sometimes that means what you're doing in the workplace. So yesterday I was taking out the compost to our compost center, and one of the seasonal ladies was like, "Oh wow, that is so great. We compost, and we handle over 1,200 pounds of food scraps a year through our composter just at our office setting." But then think about what you do at home, and it's interesting with our family. There can be upwards of 2,000 pounds of food waste a year that can get composted and turned into an organic material that can help make your soil a bigger, better sponge. But also thinking about, boy, do we really need to put that on our lawn? Does our lawn really need fertilization? Does it need herbicides? Does it need pesticides? That will all have an impact. And then also come winter, and that's just a month away, right? What are we doing for de-icing, and can we control it with a shovel, or do we really need those products? And if we need those products, how much do we really have to put down? So I think so much really focuses on each of us as an individual and our own specific choices. And then remembering what we do has contribution, in the rest of the world.
I assume if it were up to you, probably you plural, Roundup wouldn't be sold at Home Depot, I assume.
You know, I tend to think the ability to buy in bulk and potentially indiscriminately applicate without training and certification and experience, like our farmers have and our highway departments have, I think it maybe leading to some of the consequences we're seeing in water quality.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would to echo what Mark is saying, I mean, one great way to get involved is participating in things like this, right? Knowledge is power, and the more conversations that people have around water issues, whether very, very locally or regionally, helps kind of build that knowledge base among the community and maybe get inspired to kind of do those things at a local individual level. So yeah, like I'd say again, knowledge is power, talking with people, newspaper article, everything water related these days is very trending, not in a great way. And yeah, in our neck of the woods, when we think about water challenges and we think about the future and climate change and all of that, the biggest kind of problem in our area that we're facing and will be facing is flooding. And so the recommendations that Mark was making about thinking about what we put in our lawns, how we manage our lawns. Do we need to mow all of our lawns? Maybe thinking of other water conservation methods to try and keep some of that runoff from getting into our waterways. So the county had, this massive, in the city, this Save the Rain initiative for those types of related issues. And I think also just kind of in thinking about like what you can do individually, nothing is too small. Everything makes a difference, and I feel like in today's world where we're kind of being flooded with all of the bad things that we're doing to our environment, that it may feel like, well, what me putting a rain barrel out or me not, putting fertilizer on my lawn, in the scheme of things, what's that really going to do? It does. It makes a difference. It has an impact, and to kind of have that kind of sense of power and role that you can play, and hopefully not get too bogged down in the anxiety of, will this really make a difference? I think it does, and we should all kind of be inspired that even the smallest thing we do matters.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I would echo the lawns. As my neighbors know, I don't mow the lawn the way they would like me to mow. And I think there's quite a few people in the city of Syracuse who are also experimenting for a number of reasons, probably with alternative lawns. But I was just paddling the Seneca River, and you see these beautiful homes with the manicured lawns all the way up to the edge of the river. So I guess I'm seeing lawns especially adjacent to waterways. How can we think about reimagining those spaces? And I think there can be some ecological design and some ways to prioritize aesthetics, but also we're not just having fertilizers and pesticides dumped onto a perfectly manicured lawn that is then just running off right into the creek. And instead of massive riprap boulders, thinking about what are the plants that could be there that stabilize shorelines, and thinking about ecology. And so if you are a landowner, thinking about what you can do on your own little plot of land, I think is one of the best places to start, whether it's rain barrels, rain gardens, reimagining your lawn space. Another thing I would share is that is on the political action side of things and how we think about water as a community. I think we have a lot of urban streams and waterways, Onondaga Creek and the lake, and in some ways they've been disastrously polluted, managed, straightened, channelized. But restoration is possible, and I think shifting our mindset of like reimagining what these places can be and thinking about and working with local officials and policy folks in those spaces to think about how can we still care for these places? What could they be? Do we really need to bury the stream? And then in that, I think there's also flood management that can be wrapped into those kinds of design choices. And so I think reconnecting and reimagining what these degraded streams can be, and that includes Onondaga Lake. And I think there's been a major cleanup, but it's not clean. And there's ongoing mercury level rises, and paying attention to what's happening and pushing for continued action is another place where you could get involved. Where is the data being released? What are the mercury levels in the fish? Is the cleanup that happened actually continuing to reduce the levels of pollutants in that lake? Or as things shift, is the pollution becoming re-suspended in the lake? And so paying attention to that and pushing for greater cleanup. And then I think future thinking with this area, we have Micron, we have I don't know if there's any current data centers potential in the county, but everybody's talking about and thinking about data centers, and then just development of more people coming to these spaces. So how can we be active participants in the design and thinking for what this place can be to care for our water and care for all the people that are here, and also holding Micron accountable to really, they're coming here because we have great water and they need water. So how can we make sure that they're going to also care for our water, and being active in holding them accountable for doing that work. So it was just that's
Perfect, thank you. And a nice segue into the next set of questions I'd like to bring up. Unsurprisingly, a lot of questions about Micron, right? A transformational event, one of several happening soon in the near term in our community. Many wonderful aspects of it. Certainly water is perhaps more a challenge than a beneficial thing that will come out of it. Curious, we had a lot of people that, I mean, you all saw the questions, right? It was the biggest group of questions. Wonder what you might each say about the challenges, what we should do, what we should be looking out for, how to make that better, how to make lemons from lemonade if applicable. Curious what your thoughts are.
I feel we've been in communication with Micron, and one of the things that they've been very excited about is to meet the people that we work with and the organizations that we're involved with to have these conversations to talk about what are the individual organizations' priorities and how can they be a part of our community and help support those goals. So to this point, we found it very encouraging and enlightening to be able to have these conversations and be able to sit as groups and be able to talk about these items and plan for the future, because it's not just for today, it's for 3 decades from now too. So
7 generations, right?
Yeah.
Steph or Matt, you want to come in on this? You certainly don't have to, but if you have thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, it kind of putting my scientist hat on, in my mind and thinking about the development and the long-term plans for expansion, the prefabs and the fabrications that they're going to be doing. I just think this is where the initiative of organizations and even individuals in the community kind of being that ever-present watchdog and making sure that they put out this big environmental impact statement, and they're going to have plans for monitoring their intake and their outtake of all of this water usage. I think the biggest thing, especially as they start construction, is making sure that there's eyes on all of that, and we're diligently kind of evaluating the impacts, because they have, the science is there, they're making these predictions about water usage and what the effluent will be, and the potential contaminants that are going to be associated with that water usage and how that may end up back in the environment. I think we have to just really make sure that there are second, third, fourth parties kind of doing independent reviews as that information is rolling out to ensure that whatever those impacts may be are as minimal as possible, try to avoid as many impacts as possible, and use that information to inform how the next phases of fabrication are going to go, because, you know, as much as we can predict these things and make some modeling assessments, you know, you don't always know until things actually become online. So my kind of, I guess, takeaway with the Micron is the diligence of monitoring this stuff as it's happening, and I think there's a role for everybody in that.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, I think of the water issues with Micron, I just kind of writing down like 4 different aspects. First, that Micron is a huge facility and it's being built on existing wetlands, and those wetlands have been there since the glaciers receded. And those wetlands are serving a role in our ecosystem of storing water, filtering water, and slowly releasing it into the groundwater and slowly releasing it downstream into the Oswego River and downstream communities and then Lake Ontario. And downstream communities like Phoenix, their infrastructure is at pretty high risk of flooding. And so when you add more impervious surfaces, you're reducing the amount of water that wetland. So the wetland, when it rains and collects water, there's a lot of plants that are using that water and releasing it into the atmosphere. And then there's some of the water that's sitting there and then filtering down, and then some ends into the creek, and it slowly releases downstream. And when you have a bunch of impervious surfaces, you lose all of that water that the plants are giving back to the atmosphere. And so you end up with more water to deal with. You have less of it filtering down, and you have more of it running faster into the creek. And so that increases your downstream flooding. And there is stormwater management practices and plans, and I think to the regulators' best of their ability will make sure that those are all in place. But it doesn't make the impact zero. All of it, there is only so much you can do, and where the regulations are at, only so much will be cared for. So you will have higher water volumes, more sediment, more pollutants from runoff, and so on. And so Micron is mandated to restore wetlands around here and restore areas, which maybe is part of what Mark was talking about. Like, they've been reaching out, like, what should we be restoring? How can we be good neighbors? And I think it's imperative for people in organizations and citizens to demand that they are good neighbors and get involved in what those plans are that they're going to invest in and caring for, and making sure they're actually doing good restoration work with wetlands and reducing the downstream impact of flooding. And yeah, just being engaged in that conversation to really make sure they are being good neighbors. Another thing is that they're planning 4 fab units, which is they said it's going to take 16 years to construct. That means there's going to be 16 years of construction in Clay, and I just feel like it might be longer than that. But so a lot of times the environmental impact statements, are written. There's a construction phase, and then there's like, what is it like when it's done? And there's some leeway in the construction phase, but because like, this part will take 2 years, and so it's okay that it's temporary. But to think about the scale of like 16 years is a long time for that ecosystem to be receiving sediment runoff from this construction. And so I think that will have an impact on the water that I'm still trying to understand and wrap my head around. Yes, the construction, I guess, will end at some point, and it won't be a long time, but 16 years is a long time for that ecosystem to be receiving construction. And so that's thinking about the buildings and the place. Their manufacturing process uses a lot of water, which is why they want to be here, is they are going to take water and use it to wash off their computer chips. And one of the chemicals or bucket of chemicals they use is PFAS, which is a toxic chemical. It's a known carcinogen, and it's actually a suite of different types of chemicals. And they have a lot of benefits for industry. They're non-stick. They help with making vortex and making things impenetrable by water. They have like all of these useful tools, which is why people use them and have been using them in your carpets, in your Teflon, in your vortex, but then also in manufacturing. And Micron has said they're essential for making computer chips. And so one of their qualities is they don't break down. They've got these really strong chemical bonds that mean that they don't break down, so they don't naturally degrade into the ecosystem, they just stick around for a long time. And so that's another thing when you're thinking about what kinds of pollutants are heading into the water, you think about how much do they accumulate up the food chain, and then also are they gonna break down over time, or are they just gonna linger? And so this is one that's gonna linger. And so they're gonna take this fresh water that's coming out of Onondaga Lake, use it to clean their microchips, and then they'll release it downstream. And right now, New York State regulation has a couple requirements for types of PFAS, but there are so many different types of PFAS that there's many that are unregulated. And it's honestly a really big challenge. Think about how would you design a regulation that actually would capture all of those chemicals, because there's just different ways to make the chemicals that do different things. And so right now, the most that can be required is that they just monitor. So they will be releasing PFAS downstream and into Lake Ontario. A huge amount of PFAS. And this is a chemical that sticks around, and this is a chemical that is a carcinogen. And there are people who get drinking water from Lake Ontario. There are people who make their livelihoods out of fishing and eating those fish in Lake Ontario. It's a shared waterway with our neighbors to the north of Canada. It's home and has is part of Indigenous Nation territory since time immemorial. And so there's going to be this big impact to downstream waters. And I think we need to be vigilant and in the conversation about how can we make sure that they're not releasing PFAS if there's new technologies around removing PFAS, but it's a really strong chemical, and that's why they use it, but it doesn't really hard to get rid of. So it's just a really big challenge. And I think we're in a community that, we've watched industrial development come and dump pollutants in our waterways. And we see that in Onondaga Lake. And there are things we can do to clean it up, but it is way more expensive to clean it up after it's been dumped than to do everything we can to make sure it's not released in the first place. And so ways that we can hold Micron accountable for not releasing that PFAS into our ecosystem.
So Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify, which perhaps is applicable here.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off, but I do want to get,
Yeah,
if we can, a question from the audience here, and then a question if we can do it from, if there's time. Great, sir, please.
Two-part. First off, with climate change, we don't have really an opportunity to locally, monitor or impact the invasive species that are now developing because of the climate changes. So we really can't affect what's happening globally that impacts us locally to a large degree. So, your take on that. Secondly, how much enforcement is being done with farmers who are not getting the message? Because I did not see anything in either of these papers about the amount of money that's collected as a fine for those farmers who've been warned, who've all, and their remediation, their waste management programs have either not been filed or not been updated, but they're not doing best practices, and their permitting, they may not be keeping up. So I'm just wondering what's going on with enforcement. Are we collecting money from those that are not maintaining?
Mark, do you want to take that second part first, and then we'll go across?
Yeah. So the nice part about my job is soil and water is we are not regulatory, and we wear the white hat, if you will. And we have over an 86% participation rate, and it's voluntary. We're not twisting arms in the dark and stuff like that to get people involved. They're doing it because they see the value, they want to be a good neighbor. So an 86% participation rate voluntarily. The DEC is the muscle on the regulatory side. They're the ones in the EPA that are the hammer when it comes to the compliance. I don't know the dollars and cents for sure, but I can attest to you that the phone does ring and, hey, we're having a problem with so and so. We need to meet with them and see what can be done. And if nothing can be done, they do get addressed by the enforcement process.
I've just lived on Onondaga Lake for many years and I've not really seen a lot of the enforcement. That's why I was wondering if there's much fine, are there many fines that are out there for people who are not complying with the regulations?
I can tell you there are fines for sure, and even if a farm had a manure spill, they did everything in their power to stop it, contain it, respond to it, call us, call the agencies, which is actually a lawful requirement. There are still fines and penalties associated with that. If you've done your best job on the front end, the fine and penalties are going to be on the low end. But if you're snubbing your nose to them and saying, you know,
Well, that's why it might be helpful when you publish these reports.
tens of thousands of dollars, so.
You might put in some of that to give people a sense that there is enforcement going on, like, are we actually going out there and collecting penalty or fines for, because I haven't seen much, like how many farms have been fined, how much money, you know, that should be public record.
You know, and now that you say that, I've not seen a lot of those numbers. It's experience where we work hand in glove with the other departments and agencies to help address those components. I also do want to say, and we get notified of all the CAFO inspections, the farm inspections as they're coming up, and oftentimes we're an integral part because of the conservation practices that have happened on the farm. One of the other big components is it being operated and maintained as it was intended to from the design and build standpoint, and that happens on a monthly basis. And DEC has a dedicated crew for that. And again, a lot of our folks are doing a really nice job. In any industry, there's always a few birds out there that need a little adjustment and fine tuning. But we have had some really good cooperation amongst a lot of our farms, and sometimes it's one farm looking over and saying, geez, that guy's doing it right. The DEC aren't hounding him and giving him a bunch of headaches. Maybe I need to straighten up. And sometimes we'll actually have our board members go to those farms and have those conversations. That's actually one of their responsibilities, is being a board member of Soil and Water.
And I apologize to our virtual listeners and attendees in particular. We're just about out of time, so I'll stop it there. We could have talked for a lot longer, and I'm sure all would have enjoyed it. But thank you.
Don't we have 5 minutes? Usually,
We
I mean,
usually,
look at the
we
clock.
usually stop a few minutes before 1 p.m. Yeah.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, that's okay.
I wish we could go on.
So do I. Thank you.
All right, let's. Again, thank you for for all of the information that you've shared, the passion that you've shared. It was really quite amazing. As with all of our forums, this will be posted on our website. The video will be posted on our website very shortly. So be sure to check out focussyracuse.org. Also, there are ways to evaluate today's session, and including giving us suggestions as to other sessions. This session was given to us as a recommendation from someone who completed your evaluation form. So we do really look at those evaluations and look at your suggestions. Very grateful for those who've helped us keep Focus going with your donations and sponsorships. If you are so inclined, we would be very grateful for any amount of a donation today. Or going to our website and making a small donation. And if you know of any organization who would like to sponsor one of these, it's very affordable to sponsor a Focus forum. And so we appreciate it. I want to thank one group for offering this space because it's a lovely space, and they offer it for free. So even though it's a little hard to get here right now, we've all made it, so that's a good thing. So once again, thanks so much. Have a great weekend. Thank you.